Hey everybody, it's Tim Heidecker. You know me, Tim and Eric, Bridesmaids, and Fantastic Four. I'd like to personally invite you to listen to Office Hours Live with me and my co-hosts, DJ Doug Pound.
Hello.
And Vic Berger.
Howdy.
Every week we bring you laughs, fun, games, and lots of other surprises. It's live. We take your Zoom calls.
Music.
We love having fun. Excuse me?
Songs. Vic said something.
Songs.
Music.
I like having fun. I like to laugh. I like to meet people who can make me laugh. Please subscribe now.
This podcast contains explicit language. If you want to know how explicit, keep listening. Hi, I'm Josh Levin, and this is Hang Up and Listen for the week of April 24th, 2023. On this week's show, Slate's Jack Hamilton will join us to talk about Draymond Green's triumphant return to the Warriors and Dillon Brooks' Draymond Green impression for the Grizzlies. Chicago White Sox announcer Jason Benetti will also be here to discuss the changing job of a baseball play-by-play guy in the pitch clock era. And finally, Talia Barrington will come on for a conversation about the possible dawn of a new era in figure skating, as same-sex pairs might soon be eligible for competition. I'm in Washington, D.C., and I'm the author of The Queen and the host of the podcast 1 Year. Also in D.C. is Stefan Fatsis. He's the author of the books Word Freak, A Few Seconds to Panic, and Wild and Outside. Hello, Stefan.
Hey, Josh.
Any mockery of you that's to come in this podcast is only done out of love. I just want you to know that if something like that were to happen, hypothetically.
Hypothetically, I'm just going to say I had an awesome opening day in the spring softball season.
There's also some kind of fun synergies across segments. You know, maybe sometimes The Simpsons come up, maybe sometimes the pitch clock comes up in unexpected places. But
changes
I hope
in
you
the
enjoy.
Sports world come up. Yeah.
Joel Anderson, we miss you. Still hard at work on Slow Burn Season 8, coming Justice Thomas. Stay tuned for that on May 31st. And in our Slate Plus segment this week, Jack Hamilton's going to stick around. We're going to talk mostly about the West coming up in a second, and we will get more into the Eastern Conference playoffs and what we've seen from the future NBA champion New York Knicks coming up in the bonus. To hear us discuss that, you need to be a Slate Plus member. You get Knicks propaganda, as well as bonus segments in this and other Slate podcasts, ad-free shows, and you get to support us. Slate.com/hangupplus is the link to sign up. Slate.com/hangupplus. A week ago, the Sacramento Kings were looking pretty damn good. After a 114-106 win against Golden State, they were up 2-0 in their first round Western Conference Series. Plus, the Warriors' defensive star/chronic line pusher Draymond Green had stomped his way out of Game 3 by jamming his foot into Domantas Sabonis' chest. But now, as the cliche goes, we've got a brand new series after the Warriors survived Steph Curry's late-game attempt to join Chris Webber on what had been a one-man list of people remembered for blowing a huge game by calling a timeout they didn't have. Golden State survived that brain fart, beating the Kings 126-125. A win that wouldn't have been possible without the clutch second-half defense of four-time NBA champion, four-time NBA All-Star, occasional opponent groin puncher, sometimes teammate face puncher, regular podcast host, and, in Game 4 of the first round of the 2023 playoffs, selfless teammate who was willing to come off the bench. That's number 23 out of Michigan State, Draymond Green. Draymond could not be with us this week, but joining us now in his stead is Jack Hamilton. He's writing about the NBA playoffs for Slate. Jack, welcome.
Hey guys, great to be back. It's my favorite time of year.
So I was thinking last night that there's actually a quote from your favorite television show that fully encapsulates the Draymond Green experience. I'm going to lay it on you now. Let's roll it.
To alcohol, the cause of and solution to all of life's problems.
So, Jack, let us now salute Draymond Green, the cause of and solution to all of the Golden State Warriors problems every year.
Yeah, no, it's a perfect quote. Yeah, I mean, with the Draymond experience, I feel like, you know, you hear Yeah, guys, it's funny. All the guys around the Warriors organization talk about sort of, Draymond being something that constantly gives and sometimes takes away. And yeah, you got the full gamut of the Draymond experience this past week, with the suspension, which would, I think if the Warriors had lost game 3, would have been like such a controversial, I mean, it already was really controversial, but would have hung over, maybe the whole playoffs, but obviously the Warriors did win game 3, and then Draymond comes back in game 4 and plays sensationally, particularly down the stretch of that game. I mean, I don't think the Warriors win that game without all of the terrific defensive plays that Draymond made. So you really did get the full experience within, a few short days, which is how, Draymond tends to operate.
You wrote about the Warriors after game 2, and the headline on your Slate piece is this the end of the century's greatest basketball team? Didn't look like the end on Sunday, did it? They seem to rally quite well at home, though. They've had their struggles on the road. Are you going to defend that headline now?
Yeah, that was definitely one of those things where, you're sort of fishing around for a take after the first 2 games of the playoffs. There are a few times in that piece where I hedged it and, was like, well, obviously they could come back and win the next 2 games at home, which they ended up doing. I still kind of stand by that piece, though. I do think that there's enough flaws in this Warriors team, enough things that have just been on display over the course of the regular season. They've just been wildly inconsistent. They've had a lot of problems that we haven't really seen from them over the course of this very long run that they've been on. And I think there's definitely a decent chance they get past the Kings. Do I think they're going to make the finals again? I think that's probably unlikely. I would be really surprised if they were able to repeat the championship. So yeah, I do think that, while they have kind of staved off their demise, I don't know that this is going to be, a glorious return to the, mountaintop or whatever cliche you want to use.
Let's get back to the suspension and Joe Dumars. Good for Joe Dumars finding a life for himself with full-time employment assessing Draymond Green's various playoff actions. Will keep any man busy. But as part of the explanation for why he was suspended, it was, and we quote here, Green's history of unsportsmanlike acts. And let's just go into slightly more detail about what happened in game 2. Domantas Sabonis yanked on Draymond's leg, and Draymond then kicked Sabonis in the chest. So it wasn't like an entirely unmotivated Christian Laettner-like stomp on Aminu Timberlake's chest. But then what happened afterwards, Jack, and this was in front of Commissioner Adam Silver in Sacramento, is that Draymond did his thing where he, gets ejected. I think it started even before he got ejected, of goading the crowd, goading the entire arena, kind of making a spectacle of the fact that he had just kind of performed this villainous maneuver. And it seemed like that, the kind of not only lack of contrition, but the sort of like performative villainy in that case might have, been part of the motivation here. And so I think that's forgotten a little bit in the discussion, like with what Doc Rivers, the Sixers coach, have said about we need to look at the instigators and not just the retaliators. I mean, to describe Draymond as a retaliator rather than just like an all-time instigator, even in that moment, feels a little blinkered.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the sort of preening in the aftermath, his full, WWE heel maneuver that he's, it's one of Draymond's favorite things to do, is to sort of show off for the opposing crowd. I do think that factored into things, especially because, Adam Silver, the commissioner, was at the game. And I think there was, probably a sense among Silver and his, lieutenants, including Joe Dumars, that this was just going a little bit too far. And again, the history of unsportsmanlike acts, that's pretty unusual to see something like that in a justification for a suspension. I can't really recall ever seeing something like that, and at least in a playoff suspension that could have potentially been really consequential.
Are we about to get a left-wing critique of the carceral attitude of the NBA?
Well, it's just sort of an interesting thing. And Dumars then doubled down on it when he referred to, in an interview, referred to Draymond as a repeat offender. So that was sort of interesting and definitely kind of raised my eyebrows. Something that I kept coming back to also is that the incident at the beginning of the season that you alluded to, when Draymond punched Jordan Poole in the face, and then the video leaked, and it was just a huge story for about a week or so, maybe even longer than that. He kind of got away without anything for that. The Warriors kind of made this sort of in-house decision not to suspend him for any part of the regular season, and he took some time away from the team. And that was kind of interesting to think back on, because I think that was an incident too that was fairly embarrassing for the league. And I think that there was frustration in some corners that he didn't get punished more for that, given how much it kind of, commanded a lot of oxygen in those early weeks. So I think there's things like that too that people aren't even thinking about that may have gone into the thinking of the league in terms of like this, something needs to be done, like there needs to be some consequences, especially because I think that other teams have I don't know how best to say this. From what I've heard from, people who cover the NBA, there are teams who are not super thrilled with how the Warriors sometimes conduct themselves publicly, in a sense that they're sort of above the way that their ownership touts the, light years ahead thing. That they kind of play by their own rules. And I think that there was frustration in some quarters with how the earlier Draymond incident was handled.
There were other incidents in the first round of the playoffs that might have merited a game suspension that didn't. Joel Embiid kicked. Dillon Brooks and James Harden punched opposing players in the balls. They did not get suspended. It feels like the suspension of Draymond Green might have been galvanizing. I mean, it's sort of an us against them situation. I mean, look, Draymond Green took the suspension and the Warriors all sort of rallied around him because he shouldn't have been suspended. It led to Green being selfless and being willing to come off the bench and saying it was the best thing for the team because Kevon Looney had 20 rebounds in the game that Green missed. Is this going to be the narrative turning point for the Warriors if they go on to make the NBA Finals or win the title?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does open up the, when you say something like, oh, he's got a history of unsportsmanlike acts or whatever, the language was, it does suggest, I mean, very clearly that Draymond is being held to a different standard than other players. So I think, and sometimes that can be helpful, a persecution complex can give a team that type of motivation. I completely agree that I think that Joel Embiid kick, which he wasn't even ejected for, was much more egregious than any of the things that we've seen suspensions for. Like, something I often think about with this stuff is, going back to, obviously the big brawl in Detroit, a bunch of, back in 2004, 2005, whenever that was a sort of turning point in the way the NBA officiates or legislates this type of on-court acts. But I think that one of the things that has to be a consideration is actions that are going to lead to, a bigger fight. And it's something that I think no basketball fan, especially in the playoffs, wants a brawl, right? Because the NBA doesn't want it because it looks bad. Fans shouldn't want it because brawls are when you start getting a whole bunch of suspensions that are going to really, really impact, the competitive balance of a series. And I feel like the Embiid one was the one where I was like, oh my God, you have to throw him out of the game for doing that. It was like a total cheap shot, really obvious intent to hurt the guy that he did it to. So yeah, I do think that it's been a weird first week or two in terms of the standard that warrants suspension, ejection. It's seemingly kind of all over the place, and I think they need to, get their ducks in a row in terms of how this stuff is being legislated.
Well, and Draymond said after he was suspended, he alluded to there being Draymond rules, which, I guess you can have special, he and Michael Jordan, that's on his Hall of Fame plaque. They're the only people that have specific rules for themselves. But he says I'll continue to play the game how I play the game, operate how I operate, be exactly who I am, because that leads to winning. That just seems like the exact kind of quote that's going to annoy the NBA, that like he's not chastened at all. And with Stefan's point, how galvanizing would it have been if Harrison Barnes made that last shot instead of missed it.
Right. Yeah.
But let's talk about Dillon Brooks, one of the players who wasn't suspended. He has been I don't know how to attribute this, but one of my all-time favorite tweets is, quote, "It's Dillon Brooks time," attributed to Dillon Brooks, which just pops up every couple of days during the NBA season. And it's definitely been Dillon Brooks time during these playoffs, according to Dillon Brooks. He has been extremely quotable, saying about LeBron James, "I don't care, he's old." He's saying, "I poke bears. I don't respect no one until they can come and give me 40. He wishes he had been playing against him when he was in Cleveland or in Miami. It would have been a harder task." Probably true. And then in game 3, so there had been all this sort of back and forth about just the words before game 3. And then in game 3, he gets ejected for hitting LeBron in the nuts. Was not then suspended, so he will be back in game 4 on Monday night. Jack, how do you feel about the whole Dillon Brooks experience? Is he a little nice little spice to sprinkle throughout the playoffs, or is he just a little cloying in terms of his taste?
Yeah, it kind of feels like he's sort of like the Monkees to Draymond's Beatles, like it's sort of, it's all very contrived. There's something kind of tragic comic about the Dillon Brooks experience. It's been kind of a sideshow, this whole series. And I think, it speaks to the Memphis Lakers series, which I think some people went into, pretty excited about, thinking it could be pretty competitive. Memphis is a team that was once really likable, this kind of scrappy upstart. And then they just have a tendency to shoot their mouths off a lot. And I think it started to rub people the wrong way. And Dillon Brooks is absolutely the avatar of that. This guy who, dresses like a pro wrestling villain in his press conferences and stuff, and says all this kind of outrageous, these sound bites about, talking shit about LeBron and things like that. And then is totally unable to back it up because, he's a really good defensive player, but he's a pretty limited basketball player. I mean, I saw Doris Burke was even really going in on his skill set.
He obviously does not bring elite shooting, which is hot fire from Doris.
Yeah, Doris is usually, pretty chill in terms of her assessment of guys. So that was pretty scathing for her. Yeah, I mean, it's just, and the thing with Dillon Brooks too is he's a free agent at the end of this season, and I think it's a rare instance where you might be seeing a guy cost himself quite a lot of money, basically due to his inability to not, stick his foot in his mouth at press conferences, and also, the ejection. It's just it turns him into a punchline for the next several days at least, and it's just sort of I don't know, not to sound like a cliche, but it's a distraction that the Grizzlies, who are already really banged up and down 2-1 to a Lakers team who are kind of insurgent, they're the second seed in the West. They hypothetically should be winning this series. And I think most people at this point expect them to lose it. And it's just one more thing that they don't need to be dealing with.
And it doesn't seem to be particularly effective. I mean, you got to know your target here. I mean, it's LeBron fucking James. I mean, he's had 140-point games, including the playoffs in his career. Dillon Brooks has had 0. I mean, not that Dillon Brooks was talking about his scoring. And it's never been effective to try to taunt LeBron James. I mean, what was the greatest one? Lance Stevenson, probably?
Yeah.
Blowing in his ear? Was that the best?
There was an amazing list in Dave McMenamin's piece for ESPN of former LeBron antagonists. Let's stroll back through LeBron's career here. What James, a 20-year veteran, said he doesn't appreciate as much as the seemingly constant stream of agitators who have tried to rattle him. From Deshaun Stevenson to Joakim Noah, Lance Stevenson to Jason Terry, Paul Pierce to Draymond Green.
Yeah, I mean, it's never a good idea. I saw a great tweet during the last Grizzlies-Lakers game when Brooks got ejected. I think it was from Zach Harper, where it was something like, Dillon Brooks has been ejected. This is terrible news for the Los Angeles Lakers, which was, just funny. I mean, Dillon Brooks was shooting, I think, 3 for 13 when he got canned. So, yeah, it's like as Stefan was saying, the lack of effectiveness just adds a whole other layer to the ridiculousness of the Dillon Brooks experience.
Do you know, Jack, that Jay-Z released a diss track aimed at Deshaun Stevenson?
Oh, yeah, I totally remember that. Yeah, the Deshaun Stevenson thing is like kind of been swept into the dustbin of history. But for those of us who lived through it and remember it, it was truly funny. And it went on for a long time, too, because it was like Deshaun was on those Wizards teams that couldn't get by the Cavs. And then he was also on that Mavs 2011 team. So he had his little bit of redemption. But yeah, I mean, it's like he's a guy who I think the first thing, when people remember Deshaun Stevenson, the first thing they think about is like that he was this sort of hapless LeBron antagonist.
I guess, Stefan, maybe let's end here, which is on Dillon Brooks. I'll always have love for him because of the way that he exposed Coach K as a liar in the NCAA tournament. You might recall that when he was at Oregon, Dillon Brooks made a last-second three in Oregon's 82-68 win in the Sweet 16, and Mike Krzyzewski lectured him in the handshake line, talking about how he's too good of a player to be doing that, and then claimed that he didn't, and then was exposed when it turned out that he actually did. But he injured Gary Payton II in last year's playoffs. He has been. This is that led to a suspension. So he is just the kind of player that I think is kind of complicated to think about, because without guys like him or the Deshaun Stevenson LeBron thing, it certainly adds a kind of tension and level of interest to maybe first round series that wouldn't have them otherwise. Do we need just a layer of players in the NBA who see themselves as antagonists, as pests, just to make things a little bit more interesting?
Yeah.
Obviously we shouldn't injure Gary Payton II. But other than that,
no, we should not punch people in the balls or swipe them across the head while they're going for layups. But of course we do. And it's partly, every one of these guys. Dillon Brooks is an amazing basketball player. He may have shortcomings in the NBA. He may not, as Doris Burke said, bring
Dillon Brooks is an amazing
athleticism.
basketball player. Dillon Brooks.
He may not bring elite athleticism to the game, but he's an NBA player. He's amazing. But yes, we do need these kinds of players because they need them, right? Dillon Brooks needs to be this way because he's not a starting, shooting, scoring, elite player. This is how he gets to survive in the NBA and gets to stay on teams, by being an aggressive defensive player and having this persona that makes him memorable, as opposed to just the eighth guy, on the bench.
Jack, we're going to have you stick around for our Slate Plus segment where we'll get into what we've seen from the Eastern Conference playoffs so far. And you're going to keep up on the playoff writing for Slate. So folks should look out for that. Jack Hamilton, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This was tons of fun.
Up next, Chicago White Sox announcer Jason Benetti on how baseball's pitch clock has changed his job. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Let's face it, sometimes multitasking can be overwhelming. Like when your favorite podcast is playing, and the person next to you is talking, and your car fan is blasting, all while you're trying to find the perfect parking spot. But then again, sometimes multitasking is easy, like quoting with Progressive Insurance. They do the hard work of comparing rates so you can find a great rate that works for you, even if it's not with them. Give their nifty comparison tool a try, and you might just find getting the rate and coverage you deserve is easy. All you need to do is visit Progressive's website to get a quote with all the coverages you want, like comprehensive and collision coverage or personal injury protection. Then you'll see Progressive's direct rate, and their tool will provide options from other companies all lined up and ready to compare, so it's simple to choose the rate and coverages you like. Press play on comparing auto rates. quote at progressive.com to join the more than 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. A little less than a month into the 2023 season, the new pitch clock is changing the game pretty much exactly how Major League Baseball's poobahs said it would. Average game times are down 28 minutes compared to last year, from 3 hours and 6 minutes to 2 hours and 38 minutes, and pretty much everyone is happy. The players are on board, the fans are rejoicing, even crusty old columnists are writing that the clock has made baseball snappier and more exciting. And the announcers? Well, we're about to hear from one. Joining us now is Jason Benetti. He's been the lead TV announcer for the Chicago White Sox since 2016, and he also calls national football and basketball games for Fox. Jason, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
I want to start with the first game you called this year, Jason, in spring training. In a piece for The Score, Travis Sawchik said you told your producer after that game, "We are covering a different sport now." What do you remember about that day, and what led you to make that comment?
Yeah, number one was that simply the time where players were standing around was basically nil, which meant that we had to be much more surgical in our decision making. We had to say, this is the story we want to tell, and this is where we're going. And there's not nearly as much of an opportunity for missing on things like that, or for taking a second to look at the file I have about players on my computer and hit Control F like I used to find the name of the player. It's just a reorganization. When I do basketball games, I have a board in front of me with everything basically that I've prepared for the game. I've never done that particular system for baseball, and I've done that for football as well. But for baseball, it's much more of a leisurely stroll through prep work to find the story that you want to tell, or maybe you go hunting for another one just by virtue of conversation. And it's not the same in that regard anymore. I think there's still very much time for stories, but you've kind of got to be on it right away.
Was it a shock, basically, that first game? Did you find yourself going, oh shit, I have no time to talk? Were you feeling sort of unprepared?
I wouldn't say unprepared, because I've done sports like it before, but in Cars, there's that James Taylor song where he says Main Street isn't Main Street anymore. Right? Like Radiator Springs has been hollowed out and it no longer is the thriving, bustling metropolis. Like I felt like baseball isn't baseball anymore in the James Taylor sense in that way. And beautiful things like Lightning McQueen softening sprout from that. But it's a totally different situation in terms of tempo of your brain and your processing.
So I'm sitting here watching Jason on Zoom. He did not Control F Lightning McQueen there. That was just from the off the top of the dome. But I say this with a lot of love. But baseball announcers love to hear their own voices, love to hear themselves talk. Does it at all kind of change your enjoyment of the afternoon or the night at the ballpark because it is a different experience from basketball and football? You do get the opportunity to maybe, stretch your legs a little bit more.
I hear myself talk year round. I'm good. We don't need more of me. He says as a guest on a podcast, right? So I think part of it is the crisper nature of the game is just better for fans. It's just sharper. I think we have to be sharper as announcers, just in our direction of conversation. There is still time for wandering. I will say this, and I love the rules, flat out love the rules, would not trade them for anything. Did the World Baseball Classic in spring training and felt like those games were just dragging all night. So I don't want to trade it, but, I will say that there are still going to be 9-1 games. There is still going to be 15-3 games. And that's where, when you have a partner who is of a different generation, you can tease out wonderful stories. Like in spring training, our last game of spring training, we found out that Steve Stone sold prepaid funerals when he was a minor leaguer, and then also later had a job as a member of a welcome wagon. And that is quite the spectrum. And that's the type of stuff that I think we'll still have. It just comes in blowouts.
The comparison that's been made a lot in stories about the change has been Vin Scully. And that, Scully is held up as this paragon of storytelling, the long, beautiful, detailed, perfect paragraph story. But Scully did it for most of his career during 2-hour and 15-minute games. And I think the thing that seems like the adaptation that you have to make is learning how to string things out the way Scully did. He'd tell 3 sentences and then say, and it's a long fly ball to left field, call it the warning track, we'll be back with the top of the 6th, and then continue the story as if he had never stopped before. How have you found yourself adjusting how you tell stories and relate with your partner, Steve Stone?
Yeah, there are a couple factors there. Number one, you're dead on, Stefan, that games back even 30 years ago have the same crispness if you watch them on YouTube as this game does right now. It just so happens 2 factors. Number one, Vin worked alone quite a bit of the time. And number 2, television broadcasts have a lot more bells and whistles and sales elements, not only sales elements, but bells and whistles as well. StatCast powered by Google Cloud. Like, we have so much more visually that we can make appealing to an audience, and especially a younger audience. I mean, we've seen the NBA do this with next-gen telecasts having to do with advanced stats. I did the StatCast show for ESPN for a number of years, and I do think Adam Silver has talked about this in the NBA level, that television broadcasts of games may start looking a little bit more like video games for the younger audience. So it's a matter of telling stories for everybody's different way of learning, I think, that TV is kind of getting after. And so I think the storytelling is just going to be different. Somebody just going forth with this beautiful oratory is just not really in the marketplace right now. And I do wonder quite often, and this is sad to say, but I wonder quite often if Vin Scully were a double-A announcer right now at age 25, if somebody really would have bought it, if somebody would have said, that's my guy. And that's like, that hollows out my heart to think about that. But I do know minor league baseball announcers who tell stories like Vin, and they just haven't had a crack at it yet in the major leagues. So I do think it's a little bit of a different marketplace at the same time. But the challenge is doing this tight game in a manner that we do television now, with all of the different colors and pictures and toys that we have.
This is a really kind of high level question, but you have me thinking kind of big picture after that great answer. What do you kind of think of your job as a baseball announcer? Or when you talk to fans, let's say White Sox fans, if we're focusing on the local broadcast, what do they tell you they get from you? Like, what's the main thing they appreciate and enjoy from the work that you do on a daily basis?
Yeah, I mean, I have friends who write high-level news stories, and I have friends who lobby in politics, and they do similar things to I do because to what I do, because fans do come up to me and say quite often the thing they enjoy most is the Nationwide jingle on our telecast. So no, part of what we do, and I did not know this when I was doing minor league baseball. I did minor league baseball and A-ball and AAA for like 10 years. People love having the same folks in their house every night. And I am completely and utterly floored every time people come up and say, hey, I had sour cream with my meal tonight. I know you hate it from that game in Minneapolis. The memorable are the big moments in games, and then the completely trivial, nonsensical moments that we have interpersonally, Steve and I. And it is very important. Two things to me are priorities for me this year. Number one, that stuff does stay, because that's what makes partnerships unique, right? So, we're NBC Sports Chicago, and there are a couple other NBC regions, and obviously Bowie has been in the news, but a lot of the looks are the same graphically. We have to remain us. We have to remain Chicago and everything that comes with that. But the second part of it is tempo has to stay the same. We can't be, Josh, to your point, we can't be over talking and changing our rhythm because the game is faster. But yeah, fans mostly remember the stuff that they wouldn't have heard anybody else say, the ridiculous, the nonsensical, the random wanderings. And we do have to make sure that kind of stays in.
It's kind of old school when you think about it, and not just the cutting back to the same game length that we had in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and into the 80s. It's a sort of blowback against the bloat in all media, podcasts like this one that go for an hour versus a news broadcast, or the 10-part Michael Jordan documentary versus the 2-hour doc, or the 10-season TV series versus a 2.5-hour movie. There is something appealing, not just because of the pace of play, but because of the notion that we can package something and do it much more streamlined and decoratively and cleanly. Are you finding yourself sort of happy about having 30 less minutes to yak during a game?
In some ways, yes. In some ways, I think it's just better for the audience. I mean, I just saw a tweet from the New Yorker this morning that was just a headline of a story that I've been meaning to read for a while with John Swartzwelder, who was with The Simpsons for a long time, right? And he said that every episode of The Simpsons takes 6 to 8 months to build. I've been banging the drum for years that we're all competing with the big, robust drama, the Breaking Bad, the Better Call Saul, the Succession. Like, baseball on TV is a nightly thing that you can grab at any moment, just like those shows now. And we have no writer's room. So shorter is probably better, right? We're going to miss sometimes. We don't spend 6 to 8 months preparing a script. We are unscripted television that's battling with legacy scripted television for people's eyeballs. So to me, absolutely, it's a good thing, because we don't hit every time. It's just not going to happen. Not every piece of banter or wit or storytelling is great. And so I think shorter is tighter is better.
Your producer is Chris Withers, and I thought some of the insights that he had in that piece by Travis Sawchuk were really interesting, particularly around replays and the kind of typical cadence of, say, after a home run, all of the different shots that you can go to as a producer. And it made me wonder about the postseason. And I think we can all maybe conjure, let's say, like a tense ninth inning standoff between a closer and a star hitter. And you have the shot of the pitcher's face, the hitter's face, a tense fan and the crowd. You look into the dugout. How do you think that all is going to play out, and how does it affect what the producer's job is?
I think it's on producers and directors as well. The directors who are cutting cameras have got to know, and they do now, that when the pitch timer gets to even 11, you could have a pitch. So you've got to be on the pitcher. However, I also think that there are times, and it's easy to remember the high level moments where that drama really hits. But there are times where the drama is interrupted by a couple of foul balls and the announcer's in the middle of a story and then the story kind of wanes and just fizzles. Yes, the crowd is electric, but there is some redundancy there. And I do wonder if on the other side of this coin, we're going to get tighter, more precise drama, if that's even fair to say. I mean, I know as I'm saying it, there's a distinct downside to it. I'm not saying that you couldn't be completely onto something, that we lose some of the drama in the postseason, because that is a fear of mine. I think that's a possibility, and it's a fear of some players too, and of fans and all of us. But I do wonder if there's maybe a net positive that we might find because directors are just sharper with their cuts. They find better looks instead of lingering or wandering to things that may not hit. Like, you have to hit at every moment with every cut and every replay. So I do want to see what it's like once before I completely make a value judgment on the net loss of it. But I do think it's a possibility.
I mean, I have to say that for me, when Fox, I think, was the leader of sort of changing the production style of late innings, I did a piece a long time ago for the Wall Street Journal where I talked to some Fox producers about the style, which was to ratchet up the tension as the game progresses, to increase the number of cutaways to fans and people with their eyes closed and people praying as we got into the 8th and 9th inning. And I've always found that to be overproduced. And I wanted to see the players, and I wanted to see the batter and the catcher and the pitcher and the fielders and the dugout. So I kind of agree with you. I wonder if this is going to be a way to refine and create a new sort of drama. I don't think, if like in the World Baseball Classic, when you had Ohtani pitching to Mike Trout, that's inherently amazing. And I can't imagine that having 20 seconds instead of 30 seconds to show that is going to be that much of a loss.
I agree with you. I just think it's a matter of, first of all, not overreacting as a company, whomever is covering games, if somebody misses one pitch one time early in the season because they need to get their legs under them and figure out when to cut, right? You have to miss a couple in the regular season to nail it in the postseason or nail it in September, whatever that might look like. I also think that, part of the games is part of this situation this year is that there are a lot of creative people at the regional level. The Mets broadcast is one that's outside of our region that I think is just phenomenal. And they created this very filmic entrance for closer Edwin Diaz last year, where they followed him out of the bullpen with Timmy Trumpet blaring over Citi Field, and they walked him out from the gates. There are still opportunities to create characters and create moments, even if it's not hyper micro cutting the drama there. Maybe it forces creativity in some other realm that we just have not thought of yet.
All right, I'm getting notes in the Zoom chat that producer saying we need to hurry this up. We've got the new pace of play here. So I have one last request. As I'm sure you know, Jason, Stefan plays a lot of senior softball, and he's always talking to me about the home run he hit, which is probably just like
Can you not call it senior softball though, Josh?
Sorry, softball.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
He's always talking about these home runs he hits, which are probably just like older people falling down. So I'm wondering, can you tell us what it would sound like if somehow Stefan Fatsis were to hit a home run in senior softball with you on the microphone?
So number one, you called it senior softball twice, and then you said it was old people falling down.
Yeah.
So I am picturing, all right. What's the name of your team, Stefan?
We're the Reds.
You're the Reds.
Yeah, the rest of the teams are green, black, and gray. So
okay, so you're the Reds.
Yeah.
All right. So the Reds, how many innings do you play? Do you play 7?
Like 6 or 7. We play a doubleheader.
Okay.
So it's usually 6 or 7. And I am the shortstop, and I usually bat second.
Okay. All right. So game number 2, semifinals, postseason. The Reds are trailing. Bottom of the 6th inning. Stefan Fatsis at the plate. 2 on, 5-3. The Reds trailing the Fuchsias. And swing and a pop-up on the infield. Jones is under it, and he topples over. The ball falls on the ground. Fatsis is at first. He's rounding first. He's still rounding first on the way to second base. He's between first and second. Two fielders just collided and fell on top of the ball. The ball goes squirting into short left field, and Fatsis is still on his way to second base. Now he's there at second base. He's being pushed along by Anderson, who was also on base at the same time. He's come back to get him and made sure that he's still in front. He's dragging Fatsis to third base. He's still at third base. The ball is in short left field. It's under an Acura, and they're trying to somehow ferret it out from under the Acura. Fatsis at third. He might score on this. This is unbelievable. He's being dragged by his shirt collar on the way home, and he does score before the throw.
Oh, my goodness. That was one of the greatest moments of my life. Thank you, Jason.
You're welcome.
I'm honored, truly.
That's your new voicemail message, Stefan.
Stefan, if Josh had not said it was senior softball, it would have been much more of a hagiography. But I have to go with the evidence presented.
I can hit the ball. I can still hit the ball far. And you should have
Swing a
seen
long
the
drive, deep left field, and it's gone. Fatsis 440 feet to left.
go. That's more
it's
like
not
it.
nearly as funny.
No. In my defense, and you should have seen the backhanded stab I made in the hole at short on Friday night.
I love the pride for the game that you have. Like, my parody is not at all befitting of who you are in senior quote-unquote softball. But, you know, you got a podcast partner who's trying to make it that, and it's not fair of him.
The evidence-based Jason Benetti is the lead TV announcer for the Chicago White Sox. You can also hear him do football and basketball games for Fox. Jason, that was a treat. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Up next, Talia Barrington on same-sex pairs and figure skating. At the end of your first year, Discover credit cards automatically double all the cash back you've earned. That's right. Everything you earned doubled. All the cash back from eating at your favorite soup dumpling restaurant doubled. All the cash back from that trip where you sort of learned to snowboard also doubled. And the best part, you don't have to do anything ridiculous to get it. Nope, Discover does it automatically. Seriously though, see terms and check out for yourself at discover.com/match.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Whether you're driving, cooking, or doing laundry, Progressive knows the podcasts you listen to go best when they're bundled with another activity, much like how their Progressive home and auto policies go best when they're bundled. Having these two policies together makes taking care of your insurance easier and could help you save too. Customers who save by switching their home and car insurance to Progressive save nearly $800 on average. That's a whole lot of savings and protection for your favorite podcast listening activities, like going on a road trip, cooking dinner, and even hitting the gym. Yep, your home and your car are even easier to protect when you bundle your insurance together. Find your perfect combo. Get a home and car insurance quote at Progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $793 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary.
Since the 1950s, international figure skating has defined pair and ice dancing teams as one woman and one man. But that gender norm was shattered last year when the governing body of the sport in Canada changed the definition to partner A and partner B. In fact, the Canadian Federation removed all gendered language from its competition guidelines. For a sport abounding in gendered norms around appearance, style, and physicality, the change was huge. Then, as Talia Barrington reports in a terrific piece published in Slate last week, the International Skating Union, the sport's overall governing body, in February said that it too is considering a rules change that would allow same-gender teams in pairs and ice dancing. Talia Barrington joins us now. Hey, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Can you start by explaining what prompted Canada to allow same-gender teams?
So a panel within Skate Canada had a meeting after the Olympics, and they basically said, listen, you know, the rules right now define a team as being a man and a woman, and technically Timothy's participation in the Olympics kind of broke these rules. And so, maybe it's not the people that need to change, it's the rules. And they really sat down and they talked about it, and unanimously they voted to change these rules, which I think is just fantastic.
So we think of these international sports governing bodies as being very kind of sclerotic, very resistant to change. And so maybe more surprising in your piece was the revelation that it wasn't just Skate Canada, that when this got brought up at a meeting of the International Skating Union, it wasn't actually dismissed out of hand, that the kind of suggestion and implication based on your reporting is that this governing body is taking this very seriously and actually might be considering a change. Was that surprising to you to learn about?
Yes, it absolutely was. I think the history shows that there has been a lot of resistance to change. It's been a long time that non-heteronormative people have been participating in this very beautiful artistic sport. And
we also know that they ban backflips. I mean, this is like an organization that seems resistant to fun in addition to progress.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is, there is accuracy to that in the history of it. But I think right now there's a lot of people that are really looking for ways to push this sport forwards. The sport has struggled recently with viewership and sort of retaining a fan base. And I think a lot of people are trying to find ways just to keep the sport alive, to keep focus on it, because back in the 90s it enjoyed a huge amount of success, especially here in the United States, and that's kind of waned, and so as Madison Hubble beautifully said, if we don't find ways of including more people and making it more accessible, that interest is just going to taper away. And there's a lot that goes into that. It's not just this one aspect. I think, people, the fandom of figure skating is very loyal, but we want to expand that.
You mentioned Madison Hubble, an American skater. She's been training with Gabriela Papadakis, a French skater who is out bisexual. They have been working together on a routine. I mean, this feels like this change is more significant than, in some ways, the sport's willingness to change the name of the women's competition from ladies to women, which only happened last year.
Yes.
This affects the competitive part of the sport. And in the political climate that the world is in, does it risk any sort of blowback from fans of the sport? This has always been a very heteronormative sport that relies on traditional images of men and women working together.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I think there's always going to be blowback from certain quarters. I think, however, that the feedback that has been received has been overwhelmingly positive. When Skate Canada announced its rule change, of course, there were several unsavory tweets. However, the large majority has been positive. And I think even within the sport, most people talking about this now, it's not a sort of negative, positive, even those people who may be a little bit less inclined to wanting to see two women or two men skating together, they recognize that the sport needs a way to expand. And currently, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of young girls out there, in particular, who are unable to pursue competitive careers because they can't find a partner. And so they put all of these resources and hours and dreams into pursuing a sport that they really are never going to be able to pursue. So I think there's that aspect of it. And yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think that Madison Hubble, Olympic bronze medalist, Gabriela Papadakis, Olympic gold medalist, that these two women have a huge amount of popularity and dare I say clout within the sport. And so many people are looking up to them, and just young people who will watch this, these videos of them performing together and training together, I think that's really exciting for where the future of this sport can go.
So Papadakis' partner, Guillaume Cizeron, is an out gay man. They won gold at the Olympics, and you include in your piece this quote from a Russian coach who predicted that Papadakis and Cizeron would not succeed because Cizeron, quote, does not have a traditional orientation, and that since the Russian team could express true love, they would have the edge. So, I mean, these are the sorts of attitudes that are prevalent in the sport. And the kind of fundamental strangeness, I think, particularly in ice dance, where you have a couple like Tessa Virtue and Scott Moir, who, if anyone who's watched the Olympics, all of the kind of commentary, even kind of during the event, is about the kind of simmering eroticism and like sensuality of this couple who is not actually a couple, which is like disappointing to a lot of people who watch, who like ship these people. And, but that's part of the performance, right? You have to, and it seems like you get a benefit from judges if they think that you're like sleeping together, or if, I mean, it's just a totally bizarre sport in that sense. And so, how does the introduction of same-sex partners, like how does it, kind of feel liberating for athletes who felt like they had to perform an orientation that they don't have? And also, how do you feel like judges will respond to something that kind of confounds the traditional expectations for the sport?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to all of that. Even for myself. So I went as part of my reporting, and I watched Gabriella and Madison training together. And in the first maybe minute, my eyes were saying, "Oh, this is a little strange. Like this looks so different." But within 2 minutes, it was just, "Oh, these are two athletes skating together, creating a routine." And I think there's an inherently complicated aspect of any aesthetic or artistic sport, which is that it is always, as much as people try and sort of complicate it with very, very precise ruling and judging, it's always going to have a subjective quality. And so I think in reality, and I think this is what honestly viewers often connect to, figure skating is very watchable. It's enjoyable to watch, especially when the routines have some kind of chemistry to them. Now, that doesn't need to be romantic chemistry. There are lots of different types of stories. People can be fighting with each other. They could be friends. It can, an additional aspect to all of this, as I say in the piece, is that there have been several successful brother-sister teams. So they're not performing in a romantic capacity. So it will probably be a little bit of time before people get used to seeing this. It'll seem a little strange at first. We're so used to seeing the man-woman binary vision, but with time, I think it will become as normal as, any other sport where there are teams of people.
The joke, of course, will be Blades of Glory, and that's going to be the common reference point here. And you talk to a Canadian male skater who is seeking to try to find a male partner to train. Is there going to be, do you anticipate, a distinction made between two women skating together versus two men skating together? And is that overcomable, do you think, over time?
Yeah, I think this is really at the crux of sort of the discussion right now. I think there's this pervasive feeling amongst some people who are a little bit concerned about these changes, that it will be unfair, that two men skating together will inherently have some advantage over two women or even a sort of traditionally paired team. However, with the way that rulings and scorings, I should say, have shifted, the amount of athletic prowess needed by women today within a traditional pairing is so high that honestly, there's no reason why a woman wouldn't be able to lift another woman. And maybe she would team up with someone who is slightly smaller or larger to sort of facilitate that a little bit. But even so, there's no real reason why two women wouldn't be able to complete the athletic requirements and the skills requirements. So sort of, as they say in the sport, sort of the quality of the edges, the types of turns they're able to do, the spins, all of that. There's absolutely no limitation between being male or female.
Are you making a distinction between pairs and ice dancing? Is there going to be a difference potentially in how these pairs play out?
Yeah, I think that is another issue, of course, as you point out with pairs. One partner has to lift the other above their head. They have to do throws. There is a difference, in the type of physicality there between pairs and ice dance, which is a much more sort of technically intricate requirements. However, I think as a lot of people are sort of feeling is like, why not open it up? Okay, so if two women or two men find it too difficult to lift one another and throw one another in pairs, then, well, they won't get very good scores. But why should the rulings limit that possibility?
So the fear I have here, Talia, is that the conversation that you highlighted in your piece is sort of internal to the sport at this point. And what we've seen in the last year or two is that when these kind of intragroup conversations expand out, they can become fodder for a culture war. And I'm not trying to put this out into the world. I certainly hope this isn't going to happen. But once we start to get more around the Olympics and politicians or culture warriors who kind of thrive on this sort of stuff become aware of it, we're going to get stories about, what are they doing? What are they trying to message? Are they trying to send? What are they doing to our country or the world?
To our children, Josh, to our children.
Right. To our children. Is that something that people within the sport that you've heard of are a little worried about, of what happens when this kind of becomes something that more people are aware of?
I mean, I think that everyone that I spoke to is aware that there is a potential backlash. I'm just going to say this and then leave it, which is that this is a sport at which, maybe not right now, but Russia is a pretty big player in. And, it's not so welcoming to the LGBTQ community, as we know. However, I think that the need for sort of change and progress is outweighing the negative. I think just the fact, this article came out in Slate, and the overwhelming response that I've received, that Gabriella and Madison and everyone else within the article has received, has been positive. With only one or two, even vaguely negative comments. So I think that people are ready. And I think also that people see that it doesn't necessarily need to be just about sexuality. Why can't two athletes compete together and perform together in this sport that is judging skill? Right? It shouldn't be judging sexuality.
Every sport involves synchronized performance among the athletes. Great basketball players are working in teams. Shouldn't be shocking, but the fact of it will be to people. So when that first same-sex couple skates onto the ice at the Olympics, that's going to be shocking to a lot of people. And as Josh said, there is the potential for blowback. And I think a lot of this will depend on how the skating federations and announcers and sponsors choose to treat the change in the sport. Do you think that's a part of the equation as well, Talia?
I absolutely agree. I think it definitely is part of the equation. But I don't think that it's just figure skating that is sort of having a sort of moment of checking in on itself. We've seen changes, and I'm sure you guys know much more about this than me, but we've seen changes in Major League Baseball. The sports are sort of looking at themselves and saying, okay, how can we retain viewership? How can we retain loyal and interested fans? And bring more people into the wonderful world of sport, you know? So I think that how people start moving forward with this conversation is very important.
Talia Barrington is finishing her master's in journalism at NYU. We will post a link to her Slate story, The Once Unthinkable Revolution Coming to Figure Skating, on our show page. Talia, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Reboot your credit card with Apple Card, the credit card created by Apple. Apple Card gives you unlimited daily cash back, up to 3%. Now you can choose to automatically send that daily cash to a high-yield savings account where it'll grow on its own. And savings is built right into the Wallet app, so it's easy to monitor your progress. Apply for Apple Card now in the Wallet app on iPhone with no impact to your credit score, and start growing your daily cash with savings today. Apple Card subject to credit approval. Accepting an Apple Card after your application is approved will result in a hard inquiry, which may impact your credit score. Savings is available to Apple Card owners, subject to eligibility requirements. Savings accounts are provided by Goldman Sachs Bank USA. Member FDIC. Terms apply. Now it is time for Afterball, sponsored by Bennett's Prune Juice, endorsed by Kenny Sailors, who says it was okay. So, Stefan, you mentioned women are now referred to not as ladies, but as women in figure skating. And it would take a whole other podcast to go through the lack of progress in this sport. But one small sign of progress in the last Olympics was that there was a woman wearing pants. Her name was Josephine Talligard of Sweden. It's not that athletes were like not allowed to wear pants. That change had come in a little bit before, but you know, you fear what the judges are going to think. Oh, it's a woman in pants. They're going to get zeros across the board. But Sweden's Josephine Talligard felt confident. She chose it because it fits the music, and also because I feel very strong and confident in this kind of clothes. So no skirts for her, no sparkles. Maybe a few sparkles. I'm looking at this now. Yeah, you can't get rid of all of the sparkles. We got to do one thing at a time. But we will celebrate Josephine Talligard for bringing figure skating into a pants-wearing era. We salute you. Stefan, what is your Josephine Talligard?
After the Oakland Athletics announced last week that they intend to move to Las Vegas, Ray Ratto wrote in Defector that the franchise's entire civic history has been a search for leverage that they have never been able to find, even after the Raiders and then the Warriors left for Vegas and San Francisco, respectively. Ratto was talking about Oakland, but the team's shamelessness long predates its tenure on the other side of the Bay Bridge. When it comes to greener pastures, the Athletics may not have moved as much as some other franchises, but in threatening to move, they are the undisputed champions in all of our sports. For its first 50 years, the Philadelphia Athletics were a pillar of baseball, owned and managed from their inception in the new American League in 1901 until 1950 by the venerated Connie Mack. As the aging Mack was eased out of control, his three sons feuded until selling the team in 1954 to a Chicago businessman who owned Yankee Stadium and a stadium in Kansas City, where he moved the team immediately. The Kansas City Athletics would operate as a de facto Yankees farm team for the next 7 seasons until they were sold to Chicago insurance executive Charlie O. Finley. Finley was a forward-thinking marketer who in 1963 changed the team's colors from red, white, and blue to what one writer dubbed Kelly Green, Fort Knox Gold, and Wedding Gown White. On opening day that season, Finley handed out Kelly Green 10-gallon hats and released 1,000 green and gold balloons containing tickets to future games. He had sheep wearing green and gold blankets graze on an embankment beyond right field. Fans won various gifts that day: 1,000 kosher dill pickles, 1,000 pounds of fertilizer, 1,000 cans of beer. But Finley wanted out of KC almost from the start. In 1962, he had a group of buyers from Dallas-Fort Worth meet with the American League. Then he floated moving to Seattle or Milwaukee. In 1964, he signed a deal to relocate to Louisville and play in the state fairgrounds, renaming the team either the Louisville A's or the Kentucky Colonels, which would have saved on uniform costs by keeping the KC logo. Finley is a fool and his action is inexcusable, the owner of the Chicago White Sox said. The AL voted down the move 9-1. 6 weeks later, Finley tried to move to Oakland and was rejected again 9-1. Then he considered a suggestion by a local newspaper columnist to build a field and grandstands in farmland in Peculiar, Missouri, outside of Kansas City. If this should come to pass, everyone would be calling them the Peculiar Athletics, which might not be a bad idea, one reporter wrote. Atlanta, Milwaukee, New Orleans, San Diego, and Seattle were then mentioned as other destinations. In 1967, at the end of his stadium lease, Finley finally got permission to leave, choosing Oakland over Seattle. The A's won 3 World Series in the early 70s, and Finley was celebrated as a showman, but he was despised throughout baseball by players, fans, and fellow owners alike. In 1975, he hatched a plan to move the A's to Chicago and have the White Sox move to Seattle. In 1978, he tried to sell the team to Denver oil baron Marvin Davis, then to a group from New Orleans in 1979, then to Marvin Davis again in 1980. Toronto was a rumored destination at one point, too. Finally, Finley sold to Walter Haas, who did not threaten to move the team and built a popular and successful club for 15 years in the 80s and early 90s. Since he and his partners bought the team in 2005, the current owner, Gap scion John Fisher, has been Finley-esque both in his parsimony and his threats. Fisher previously tried to move the A's to Fremont and San Jose, south of the Bay Area, before finally this latest stalking horse or actual destination or forerunner to selling the franchise when the deal falls apart, Las Vegas. Anyway, by my official count, Josh, the Philadelphia, Kansas City, Oakland Athletics have moved, planned to move, or threatened to move at least 21 times in the history of the franchise. Nice work, Athletics. Nice work, baseball.
That's amazing. I mean, based on your reading of the history, do you feel more or less inclined to believe that they're actually going to move to Vegas?
Oh, I'm less inclined to believe. And that also, based on...
But they bought the land. They have a deal for the land,
Yeah,
Stefan.
They have a deal for the land. They don't have a deal for the city of Las Vegas to give them, $500 million in subsidies and improvements around the stadium and build retail and whatever else they're going to want to build. I am dubious. My guess is that this is going to wind up with a sale and a relocation to one of the other cities that baseball has been targeting for expansion after the A's and the Rays stadium situations are resolved.
I remember when the Times-Picayune, when I was a kid, published like a huge banner front page headline about the city getting an NBA team, with the headline "Got 'em." And the city did ultimately get an NBA team, but it was not the Got 'em team, which was the Minnesota Timberwolves. But it's always good to remind, whether they're headline writers in newspapers or people like me, that this is a game, maneuvering.
Yep.
And the A's have done it better than anybody else. That is our show for today. Our producer is Kevin Bendis. To listen to past shows and subscribe or just reach out, go to slate.com/hangup. You can email us at hangup@slate.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. For Stefan Fatsis, I'm Josh Levin. Remember Zelmo Beatty, and thanks for listening.